Hi everyone, I'm Tara Lawn. Welcome to Time Out with Tinseltown Mom. Today I'm going to be speaking with E. Parker Herring, a board-certified family law specialist with more than 25 years of experience. Parker is the director of A Child's Hope, a domestic North Carolina adoption agency. She's also the founder and managing member of Parker Herring Law Group, PLLC. Today she's going to talk about when a parent wants to give an older child up for adoption, plus the complete adoption process. Hi, Parker. Welcome.
Thank you.
Well, thank you for being here. I'm very excited to hear your expertise on this subject.
Certainly. It's one of my favorite subjects.
Well, why don't we start by just getting to know you a little bit better? Can you just tell us about you, your family dynamic, and what you do specifically?
Yes. I grew up here in Raleigh, North Carolina, went to undergraduate at UNC Chapel Hill, and then I went to law school at Wake Forest. And I practiced primarily family law or divorce law until 20 years ago when I added adoption law and assisted reproduction to my law practice. And now I've phased out divorce law and I do all adoption and all assisted reproduction, which is basically surrogacy.
Mm-hmm.
And then I started my adoption agency 21 years ago.
Oh, so you started the adoption agency when you still had your law practice?
Yes. So the adoption agency is in a separate area of my law practice. It's a separate institution and, it's a separate group.
Okay. And then tell us a little bit about your family dynamic. I know you've adopted children yourself, right?
Yes, I adopted my first son 23 years ago, and he's actually the reason I formed an adoption agency because I used a wonderful adoption agency, Gladney, but they're licensed in 26 different states, and we had to go to New Mexico to pick him up when he was born. And there were a lot of costs because whenever you adopt out of state, you have to have an attorney in that state. And then we had to stay there for 10 days. And so I came back and I asked my law partner, this is ridiculous because our adoption ended up costing $35, and that was 23 years ago.
You say 35,000?
Yeah. Yes, and that was 23 years ago.
Wow.
So it cost because we had to go stay there in Albuquerque, New Mexico for 10 days, and we had to hire an attorney in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and then our agency was based out of Texas. So when I came back, I talked to my partner, and he said about a third of your cost have to do with the fact that you were out of state. And since I grew up here and have a fondness for my home state, I started an agency, and our focus is on matching North Carolina birth mothers with North Carolina couples. And by doing that, I felt that the couples could easily meet the birth mothers. You could easily travel there for the delivery, and you can stay in touch over the years. It would be a lot easier initially to find the biological fathers. And you would only have one set of laws, the state of North Carolina, to deal with. And it's worked out really well because the costs are greatly reduced by eliminating that out of state.
So you're an adoption agency plus you're a law practice. So you do everything for the families. Is that correct?
Yes, the families can use my law practice if they want to for the finalization. Of course, they don't have to. And we have some occasionally that will pick another attorney, and that's fine. But by my being involved in the very beginning, when a birth mother calls, I feel that we do a wonderful service to the birth mothers. And to the adoptive parents, because we're asking questions right away. Who's the biological father? And because she's in North Carolina, we have 7 adoption counselors spread throughout the state, and we can go ahead and pretty much meet up with the birth mom in her home city, and we're probably going to be able to find the birth father, and in many cases, we can meet up with the birth father too. So it works, very well to handle it that way.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And do you represent the birth mother and the adoptive family, or just the birth mother primarily?
No, we can't represent both, of course. We offer the birth mother if she'd like to get her own attorney, but we are actually representing the adoptive family when they hire us legally.
Oh, I see. I see. Okay. All right, wonderful. So today we're going to talk about when a family wants to give up an older child for adoption. I'm assuming that most people who give up their child for adoption, there it's at birth. Is that correct? Is that what you see
That's right.
primarily? Okay.
They
Um,
usually contact us before they deliver. We do get some calls from the hospital, but we also get some birth mothers who've already delivered.
okay. So usually, just so everyone is aware, and just for my own edification, so before the baby is even born, you're contacted so there can be a family that's sought out for that baby. Is that correct?
That's right. And the birth mother can be screened. We can get a copy of her health records. We can start counseling her in terms of, the process and anticipatory grief and letting her get to know the adoptive families so that she's comfortable with the one she chooses. And then they develop a relationship.
Okay, okay. And do you see a lot of cases where a birth mother, she's intending to give her child up for adoption, but let's say in the eighth or ninth month, she has a change of heart and she wants to keep the baby?
Yes.
And
Yes.
what do you do in that scenario? Like when you've already found the birth or the adoptive family in that, like what do you do in that situation?
Well, our counselors meet with the birth mom, the counselor that was assigned, and they go over her reasons for placing to begin with, and then offer her counseling about what her change of heart is due to, whether it's due to family members telling her that she should parent the child, or whether she's just honestly her situation's changed and financially she's going to be able to do it. And then we go back to the adoptive couple, and of course they're very sad, but then they write a letter or send a card to birth mom to leave the door open in case she tries to parent and is not able to, and then birth mom delivers and parents the child.
Oh, okay. Now, have you seen scenarios where they've written a letter, okay, we're here if you have a change of heart, and then let's say a month or two they do have a change of heart?
Yes,
Oh,
yes,
okay. Okay. And then you just continue along the process as you were originally.
that's right. We contact the adoptive family and say birth mother's tried parenting for a month, and the family that she had hoped would help her have not come through. And so she does want to go ahead now and talk to you about placing the child.
Okay. Now, I know you've had over 20 years of experience. Just from your experience, what's the oldest child that you've seen a birth mother has tried to give her child up for adoption or has given her child up for adoption?
In my particular agency, 8 years old was the oldest.
Oh, wow. Okay. Now, did they actually give that child up for adoption or they just wanted to?
No, they actually did. And that was 10 years ago, and she's graduating from high school this year.
Okay. So yeah, so I really want to hone in on that because there may be some, moms listening, maybe they do have an older child and they're in a difficult situation and, they do intend or they have plans to give their child up for adoption, which I know this is a very sensitive subject. So in your scenario for the 8-year-old, are you at liberty to say, I mean, not any names or anything, of course, but just what was the circumstances surrounding why that mother wanted to give that child up at that late age?
Yes, certainly it was very sad, but the child had been raised from birth by the biological father, and the birth mother had never actually bonded with the child. And the birth mother herself was fairly young when she gave birth. So the biological father took care of the child, and the birth mother did not have a relationship with her. And the biological father died of cancer.
Mm.
So the biological mom contacted us and she said, I went on to get married and I am pregnant now with twins and I had another child and I am not going to be able to take this child into my life. So we talked to her, counseled her, and found a family that was very open to an older child because that couple themselves were in their late 40s, and they were able to take the child and have been parenting her ever since.
Oh, wow. Now I can imagine that was very difficult for the 8-year-old.
It was, although you have to remember in that particular case, the child had not bonded with the birth mother. So she was very scared because her dad had died and she had always taken care of him.
Now, have you seen any other scenarios where an older child, like even at toddler age or, 5 or 6 even, like have you seen any other older children that have been given up for adoption?
Yes, we had, now this has been some time ago, but we had a set of twins, and their birth mom placed them when they were 5, I believe. She just was not able to take care of them. Multiples are a particular challenge to single parents. And if the birth father is not around and is not giving help, then it can be a really a challenge for the birth mother to take care of the child when they're 2. So in that particular age, we had a young couple and they were thrilled and they've had the children in their care since.
Okay. Now, when you are counseling the mothers, let's say they want to give an older child up for adoption, for example, during that counseling process, have you ever, in your experience, uncovered where maybe you thought maybe the parent was capable of raising that child, but maybe just because of, I don't know, maybe they needed some parenting counseling or something else just to assist them in their parenting journey? Like, have you ever seen any scenario like that?
Yes, resources. So we try to let them know. Now, one of the first questions we always ask when there are older children and a birth mom contacts us is Department of Social Services involved? Because if the Department of Social Services is involved, it sort of changes the whole scenario because birth mother may not have much time and there may be a long history of neglect and abuse. So we always ask that question because birth mother can avoid Department of Social Services taking the child and then going through that process with DSS. So, but we go through, we explore with her, what are your issues? For example, we have a birth mother right now that has a 16-month-old and she's single and she and dad are both in college and are both working very hard. I think one works at Target. And she said, I don't get to spend any time with this child. I'm just not able to spend any time with this child. And his dad's on full scholarship and has to keep his grades up. And they lost their jobs for a while during COVID and they're trying to recover. So we're exploring with her, well, what are your family resources? How do you feel about this child? What do you think? How do you think this will affect you? How will it affect the child? And we go through the resources. Has she gotten WIC, which gives her about $75 a month? Is she getting food stamps? But in many of these cases, they're getting all of the government help they could possibly help, but they just don't have the family help to help them.
Yeah, and I know that's very important.
Mhm.
So let's say there's a parent listening and maybe they're considering adoption for their older child. Like what should be their first course of action? Like if they're just thinking about it, like maybe for whatever reason they feel like they can't be the best parent for that child. Like what should be their first step?
Well, first of all, their first step should be not to feel guilty because they're seeking out what is best for the child. And then they really should call an adoption agency that could possibly place the child. Now, licensed adoption agencies frequently work with newborns to 4 or 5 years old. And the sooner they can place in terms of the child's age, the easier it's going to be for the child because the child maybe hasn't connected with the parents if they're younger. We had a birth mother place a 9-month-old this year, and that child just transitioned very smoothly. A couple of years ago, we had a birth mom place a 6-month-old. But the first thing she should do is call an agency and talk about her situation.
Yeah, I'm imagining. Let's say it is an older child, and they want to give their child up for adoption. Like, what if they don't find any adoptive parents to take that child? Like, how do they proceed in that scenario?
Well, I can honestly tell you there's a family for every child. Right now, the birth rate is the lowest it's been since 1979. And with COVID, there people out there want children, and these people are in a situation where they have the resources financially and emotionally to take care of a child. So there is going to be a family for that child.
Okay.
Um,
So does the birth parent, do they wait, like let's say the child is 3 or 4 and they want to give that child up for adoption, do they wait until there's a suitable family before giving that child up, or is there like a, and I excuse my ignorance, but like a foster care system that the child will go to first before that child is adopted?
well, in our agency, what we have, we check to make sure DSS not involved. And then we try to move pretty quickly by getting a copy of the child's medical records, sitting down and going over with the mother about the schedule. And then at any one time, we have 25 to 30 families that are waiting for a child, and we send out the opportunity to our waiting families. For example, I mentioned the 8-year-old. We had 2 families that were very interested in that 8-year-old little girl.
Hmm.
Um, so basically, in our state, because there's a period in which a birth mother can change her mind, we ask her to keep the child during that 7-day revocation period, so that she has time to think about it. She's signed, and she has time to think about it, and it's another week for transition to the adoptive parents.
Okay. In your scenario or in your experience, how long does it usually take for a family to be found? Like, does it take months or up to a year?
Usually just a few weeks.
Oh, okay.
But you want to transition the child. You, depending on the age of the child, the ideal situation is to transition the child. Get a list of their schedule, have the birth mother meet the potential adoptive parents, and then have them meet the child, and then have some transition occur, at a playground, in the office, just some transition after we've gotten school records, medical records, and information about the child's schedule. What's the child's routine as far as eating, sleeping. And then the child would be transitioned, and the birth mother would sign. And then our state, she has 7 days to change her mind.
And how long again is the transition period for the child just to get acclimated to the adoptive
It
parents?
it depends on the age of the child, and it depends on the birth mother's situation. Um, if she's not in a desperate situation, uh, it can take 4 to 6 weeks to transition the child. If the child is older, Department of Social Services really likes to spend a longer time transition, but sometimes the adoptive parents, sometimes the birth parents just aren't in a position to do it. They're
Yeah.
just not in a position. When I mentioned the 8-year-old, we were looking at, trying to transition over 46 weeks. And on the first visit with the adoptive parent, the birth mother said, please take this child tonight. I really haven't bonded with her. I'm pregnant with twins. I really can't take care of her. So that family very, very graciously just took the child and went from there.
Wow. Okay. Okay. And then during that transition period, let's say with an older child, is there some talk to the child that this is going to be your new family? Like, what type of dialogue, I guess, or communication is given to that child to prepare them for this new family?
Um, you do a lot. We have a procedures, and so you have several meetings with the child, and the counselor works with the child and explains the situation. And then you set up, uh, almost all of these are open adoptions. So the birth mother can receive information over time about how the child's doing. They often set up Facebooks with just first names so they can see pictures. You might have visits, but you want to give the child time, at least 30 days in the new home before you initiate new contact.
Okay. All right. And have you seen a scenario where a parent wants to give up their child for adoption and they have siblings and they choose to keep the siblings but give that child up?
Yes, we have seen that. And, we always encourage to try to keep the siblings together. But sometimes the adoptive families don't want to do that. Sometimes the birth parents don't want to do that. We recently placed a 9-month-old Hispanic girl, and she had a 3-year-old brother, and they sent the 3-year-old brother back to Mexico. And,
Oh.
that was their choice.
Mm.
But we had a final visit, and we're going to stay in touch. And so he always knows that he has a sister here.
Mm-hmm. Now, have you seen parents wanting to give up their older child for behavioral reasons? Is that something that's common?
Yes, we're seeing a lot, especially autism or severe ADD, and they don't have the time to get the resources to help that child. Counseling, parenting a child with ADD or ADHD is challenging. And so, if you can be in a family where there are two parents to take care of that child, that's wonderful. But there are a lot of therapies and medications that can be used to help with that child.
Okay. Now, are these like extreme cases of ADD and ADHD that you're seeing?
It varies. We always check if it's autism to see if the child's verbal or not, what therapies the child has had, and it is harder to place older children with special needs.
Yeah. So what happens during that scenario? I'm imagining it doesn't just take a few weeks, right? In that case.
It takes longer, but there are agencies spread throughout the United States who have families enrolled just for the purpose of taking in special needs child. There's an special angel adoption, and we used them 3 years ago. We had a family that had actually come here for Russia, and that baby was 26 weeks old and was when he was born, very challenging situation. And, we checked with our waiting families, and then we checked with our past placed waiting families, because we've placed about 410 babies in 20 years. And we could not find a family that felt they could effectively parent that child. But with special angel adoption, we did find a family, and they had signed up just to parent children with special needs.
Okay. All right. Well, that's great that you're saying that, there's a family for all these kids that need a family. That's hopeful for a lot of parents that are listening.
Yes.
So just going back to a mother who decides to give a child up for adoption, but she wants to keep the siblings. Like, have you seen that actual scenario where she wants to keep the siblings at home, but because of behavioral issues or maybe mental health issues for one child, that's the child they choose to give up? Like, have you seen that particular scenario where
Yes.
they keep the other kids at home?
Yes.
Okay. And is that the same scenario where it's because of mental health issues?
It could be. We were contacted this past year from a birth mother who has 5 children totally. She's parenting by herself. And the 5th child, the youngest child, we're not sure if he's on the autism spectrum or if it's ADHD, but she's not able to parent him. She's not able to control his behavior so that he doesn't hurt the other siblings. And, 5 children is a lot for a single mother.
Mm-hmm.
So she was looking at placing.
Okay. All right. But I guess it's important also to mention that you do have counselors for the moms, like when they do make this decision, to help them through this process.
Yes, we do. And they're spread throughout our state. So they're going to be, I think it's much more effective to counsel in person than it is to counsel by texting or counsel, on the phone. We like to be able to go and meet with the birth mom For example, we have a situation where the birth mom's thinking about placing, and our counselor is going to go sit down and meet with her next week, and talk to her about whether how she feels about parenting this child and what her day is like and what her resources are.
Okay. Now, have you seen a scenario where the adoptive family decides they want to give the child back? Like, is that something that's common?
I have not seen that in my agency. The screening problem and the screening process and the counseling that they receive and helping them with resources, we have not seen a family in our agency. I have heard about it in other agencies, and I think you can lower the amount of that the times that happens by doing a lot of transitioning and resource.
And what does that look like?
The adoptive parents know they can call us if they're having trouble. So if the counselor is still working with us that work with them, then we talk to them about what their situation is. What kind of therapies do they have the child in? What kind of help are they getting if it was a special needs adoption, and what's available to them.
That's great, because I'm sure they'll need resources, even the adoptive families afterwards, to make sure they're going to be the best parents that they can be for the child. Can you just briefly explain the difference between an open adoption versus a private adoption?
Yes, it's sort of a misnomer. A private adoption is where you don't go through an agency, but it's completely open by law. An open adoption, which is definitely the trend now, and I would say at least 95% of adoptions are open, are where you meet on a first name basis, and then over the years you communicate directly. So when you place the child, you exchange phone numbers, emails, etc., and then you communicate directly about the child. So that is an open adoption, and adoption professionals feel pretty strongly that those adoptions are the best situation for most children. The only families that we don't recommend for open adoption are if the birth mom has severe mental illness where she can't respect boundaries, or if she has addiction issues.
Okay. So with the open adoptions, do the birth mothers, do they still have an open line of communication with that child if they want that?
Yes.
Okay. So it's not confusing to the child, because I'm sure there's boundaries set in place.
If you're placing a child, what do you want to know in the future? You want to know that child's doing okay. That's mainly what you want to see. Mm-hmm. So seeing a picture of the child at a restaurant with parents or on a baseball field really gives you a great deal of peace of mind, because it's a trust issue for women placing children for adoption. They may feel, well, the adoptive parents are putting their best foot forward, but all adoptive families have been very carefully screened through the home study process. It is not an easy process. You have 3 visits. You have criminal checks, you have references, you have medical information and input. So the process is not that easy.
Right. Okay. Well, you are a wealth of information. Is there anything else that you think that you should bring up just to any parent that's considering putting their child up for adoption? Anything that you think might be helpful for them?
Well, I think what would be helpful is to take your time to, if you're thinking about it, explore and sit down and make a list, the positives of placing the child for adoption and the negative. And it's not just the positives to you, but it's all about the child. What are the positives for this child to be placed for adoption? And take your time, and don't be rushed into it. And be careful when you're talking to family, because if they're not helping you now, then they may come forward and say, well, we'll help you. But the issue is what's best for your child. How much, you love your child, and what's best for your child.
Mm-hmm. That's good. All right. Well, thank you so much, Parker, for being here today. Where can people find you if they want to know more about you and what you do?
Certainly. Well, my agency is www.achildshope.com, And my law practice is Parker Herring, Parker, Herring, Herring Law Group.
Thanks for listening to Time Out with Tinseltown Mom. If you liked what you heard today, please be so kind and rate, review, and subscribe on iTunes or wherever you listen to podcasts. Until next time.